All right. Hey there, folks. Even though convention signings and other live events are back on track, I figured I would keep bringing book tour to you. So, welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. So, we've been doing a deeper dive these days into the world of dark fiction and horror. And to keep that creepy trend going, please welcome tonight's guest, the best-selling New York Times best-selling horror author, Paul Tremblay. Paul has won the Bram Stoker British Fantasy and Massachusetts Book Awards, and his novel, The Cabin at the End of the World, was adapted by Universal Pictures. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Russ. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, just a quick heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send any notes or questions you have for Paul in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, Paul, as we always do, we're going to start at the beginning. Where were you
Oh
born?
boy.
Then where,
Uh, so,
then where'd you grow
yeah.
up?
So I was born in Aurora, Colorado. My father was in the Air Force in the I guess early 70s at this point. Um, yeah, so I was born in a sort of, as my mother always describes, as an army hospital. But me personally, I was only in Aurora until I was about like 9, 10 months old.
I
And
see.
then my parents flew back home. The home for them was the Boston area. For my father, Beverly, Massachusetts. And so I basically, spent the rest of my childhood in the town of Beverly. And so, it's funny, I don't think of myself as being from Colorado. And every once in a while, someone will just like look at the Wikipedia page and be like,
Right.
oh, and I had someone like a pretty big Colorado newspaper like, oh, we want to talk to you about like how Colorado shapes your fiction. I'm like, sorry, man.
It doesn't.
Like, not only was I only there for like 10 months, like I went to Denver for the first time ever, not since being a baby,
Yeah.
this past summer. So
Well, eventually you made it back home.
yeah, I did eventually. Yeah.
So how long were your parents in Colorado?
Not long. It was a really short, I
Oh,
think
I see.
like 2 year stint
Oh, I
or
see.
whatever his term was for the Air Force.
Right. Okay.
He was able to somehow enlist in the Air Force to he playfully says it to avoid sort of actually going to Vietnam. But yeah, I mean, he joined the Air Force somehow. He didn't get sent over. He stayed in Colorado and was like a sort of like an accountant or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So when you guys moved to Massachusetts, did your dad stay in the Air Force or did he?
No, no, he just yeah. What he started working at the Parker Brothers factory. So I'm sure you remember Parker Brothers, but
I sure
anybody else,
did.
Parker Brothers used to make,
Board games.
well, it still says Parker Brothers on it, but it's owned by Hasbro. But they made Monopoly, Nerf, Clue,
Yeah.
Sorry. Did they make Sorry? I'm gonna retract Sorry. Maybe not Sorry. I don't remember. But definitely Clue and Monopoly
Okay.
and
Yes.
Nerf. We
We're,
had Nerf everything in my house.
we're gonna talk more about that in a minute.
Yeah.
So you grew up in, and just geographically set the stage. Where is Beverly, Massachusetts?
Yeah, so Beverly is about like, just slightly 20-ish miles due north of Boston if you follow the coast. And it borders Salem. Salem is on its south. Salem is obviously much more famous.
Right.
Salem is actually Beverly High School's rival.
Is
They've
it
played,
really?
the two high schools have played football on Thanksgiving for, I don't know, for really long time, probably like approaching 100 years at this point.
So I want.
Yeah.
So actually, that's an interesting an aside. I want to ask you about this. So I was at Nikon this last summer, and we were only an hour away um, from Salem.
Mhm.
And my buddy and I, we said, look, when's the next time we're going to get up here? Who knows?
Right.
Let's go to Salem. Now, in our minds, now granted, this was based on nothing other than what we envisioned in our brains. And in
Yeah.
our minds, Salem was like this very sort of Newhart-esque kind of, New England sort of like, kind of like this quasi-elegant sort of, quaint little town. And we get there and I hate to say it, but it's kind of crappy. And like
Yeah.
it was like really run down and very touristy and old and cheap. And
Yeah.
it was just not what it's just not it's not what I expected.
Yeah, no, it's a very strange town. It's a very sort of schizophrenic in a way in terms of like the different parts, different sort of personalities or vibes that you get. Even back when I was growing up, I don't know what the population is now, but I believe it's over 40,000 people. So it's a fairly sizable town. And there are definitely parts, I don't know how the demographics have changed or the economics have changed for Salem, but again, when I was growing up, the parts of Salem that were really close to Lynn, uh, were sort of like almost like urban blight kind of sections. But
Right.
then you have the historical section of
Right.
Salem. You have definitely some very touristy parts, but the parts by the water, like Pickering Wharf, is really nice. The Hawthorne Hotel and even the
Yep.
House of Seven Gables, all that
Yep.
stuff is really interesting. So yeah, Salem is a very strange town that sort of makes a lot of money off of the weird, both recognizing but also like oddly like commercializing like the state sanctioned death of 19 people.
Right.
It is very bizarre.
So we drove in and just, we followed kind of the GPS and and we drove up and we're facing this mall. And I forget what it's called. It's like the whatever, the witch mall or the witchy mall or
Oh, okay, yeah.
whatever it's called. I can't really remember. And we're like, what is this? We're like, we don't know. So we just sort of got it because we wanted to go to, that historical site where they put on they put on like the little displays of, the witch trials and all that,
Yep.
which as it turns out, it's just like it's 2 minutes up the block.
Yeah.
We didn't know that. So first we went into the mall, and the mall is literally falling. I mean, I work in
Oh
the
yeah, that indoor mall is terrible. Yeah.
yeah, I
It's
work
yeah.
in the real estate business, and I'm looking around. I'm like, what is this? Right? I mean, it was literally like it was like a truck stop. Like, what is happening? So we walk around. We wind up going down by the wharf, and they said, here are the key spots. I'm like, okay, they have the little, they have the light tower, the lighthouse. We're like, all right, we'll
Yeah.
see it. And we're looking, and you're looking up in the air for a light tower. And I'm like, I don't see anything. And I talked to someone. I'm like, do you know where this light tower is? He's like, I don't know. I think it's over there someplace. And someone who was sitting around said, no, it's right over there. I said, where? He said, that little squat building over there. I said, yeah. He goes, that's it. I'm like, come on, that can't be right. So I go into this like a tourist shop on the corner and I said, hey,
Yeah.
we're just coming in from out of town. That little squat thing, that's the lighthouse. I like, that's not the real thing, right? That's they probably like it got old and they just did it like as a they rebuilt it just to memorialize
Yeah.
it. And he went, no, that's the lighthouse. I felt so bad. I wasn't trying to embarrass the guy. Just like
Yeah. Yeah.
you think light, you think light, light tower. You think it's gonna be this giant thing. All right. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm blabbering on enough about Salem.
Yeah.
All right. So when you were a kid, what was the lineup? Was it just you? Do you have brothers, sisters? Like what was going on at home?
Yeah, so my sister, my family, my mom's side of the family are Irish. I playfully call her my Irish twin because she's 11 months younger than I am. Uh, and then my younger brother Dan is 5 years younger than me. We're all June babies.
Oh,
Yeah, so I mean, I remain very close with my siblings. Yeah, we all live within like 10, 15 miles of each other.
okay, stuff.
We fought like cat and dogs as kids, as most people do, but yeah, I'm very lucky that I am close with them and that, they're really like my best friends too. So
Oh wow.
it's
Oh, that's
cool.
great.
Yeah.
It's great. And so when your dad left the army, what did he do?
So I
Air
mean,
Force, I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so he worked, so the Parker Brothers factory was in Salem.
Oh, that's right, Parker Brothers.
And
Right.
that factory was built in like 1917 or something like that, I believe. Um,
What was his role there?
I mean, he started off basically like lowest level, like helping to unload the trucks or sometimes working on the assembly lines. And, he ended up working there for 25 years. So he had a bunch of different jobs. By the end of his employment there, he was sort of in charge of the mailroom. Um, but, still sort of like very a blue collar job. And I would work there. I worked at the factory during high school summers and a few college summers as well. So I worked on the assembly lines. I used to be afraid of Ouija boards until I helped mass produce them. I'm still kind of afraid of them, but it did take like the luster off, like, helping to produce
So
thousands of
hold
Ouija
on. So
boards.
stick
Yeah.
with that. Stick with that for a second. So when I was a kid, I didn't, and it's interesting because now that I'm really kind of getting much, much deeper into the horror world, I was not a horror kid when I grew up.
Yeah.
I really wasn't that much. For me, I watched some of the classics. It was like Poltergeist was a great movie, and American Werewolf in London, and Nightmare on Elm Street, the classics. But beyond that, I wasn't really a big horror guy. But and certain people were really into the whole Ouija thing, and I never
Uh,
really did that as a kid. Now I know in my head, it's just a piece of plastic. that you're doing a thing, and yet it seems to hold some sort of like psychic or like psychological power over so many of us. We know it's just a piece of plastic that came in a box that got
Yeah.
mass produced in China, Taiwan, or wherever they make it, right? But yet it has this sort of like essence that kind of just like has soaked into our, our collective consciousness. Even the fact that you're saying you physically held this piece of plastic in your hands 1,000 times and yet it still spooks you. So what is it about that? Like, what's the spookiness?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that part of it's just the imagination, like that you want to believe, and some of it's the lizard brain, right? If you don't understand something right away, like a lot of us just jump to like, oh, like an anti-Occam's razor sort of explanation as to why it works. But I mean, the one time not that I ever messed around with Ouija boards very much, but there was one time at my grandparents' house. So my dad's grandparents lived in Beverly, and we actually lived in that. They had a three family, and we lived there until I was about like 4 or 5, and then moved just across town, still in Beverly, to my family's own house. But we'd still go to my grandparents every Sunday, which was a lot of fun. So we just had big family, cousins, uncles, aunts, everybody would go over and play cards and the kids would play. So anyway, I don't know who got a hold of a Ouija board. Maybe my older cousin did, because I was only like in fourth grade at this point. And we were messing around with it, asking like, oh, who am I going to marry when I grow up and stuff like that. But the last question that was asked was, are you a good spirit? Um, and it spelled out at times, which man, it was like a perfect, I mean, in terms of like a creepy answer. And I mean, nothing could be more scary. So like
Whoa.
we all started screaming. Yeah, totally freaked out. Um, yeah, so I think that's like really the last time I've ever messed around with one. Again, like I don't believe in that. I don't believe in like ghosts and spirit stuff, but at the same time, I don't want to be proved wrong.
Ah, you
So
know
I
what?
avoid trying to be proved
Right,
wrong.
right,
Yeah,
right, right. Why do I want to tempt fate?
yeah.
Right, right. Fair enough. So what were you into as a kid? Like what were your deal? Were you a music guy, a sports guy, a nerd, a little bit of everything, nothing? Like what kept you busy?
Yeah, I mean, I was very close with my family, as I mentioned. Lucky I had siblings. My brother, even though he was 5 years younger, we would always like, especially when we were older, just play. Some of it was sports, but I was a very, very skinny, super skinny. Like I'm like 6'3", 6'4", 205. But like when I graduated high school, I was 6 foot with a curved spine and 140 pounds when I graduated high school. So like painfully skinny, not very confident. So I didn't really hang out like with a lot of friends growing up. Was more just all family stuff. So
Hmm,
my own interest was I watched a shit ton of television.
okay.
Beverly, I feel like Beverly was one of the first towns to get cable TV.
Okay.
Uh, like
So what
early 80s, maybe even 1980. So
yeah,
just
yeah.
so much of my childhood was coming home watching TV or just being outside by myself shooting hoops to
Okay.
we had like this really beat up garage and just nailed up like a basketball net to the top of it. Um, eventually, music became like a big deal for me in seventh grade when Pyromania came out, Def Leppard. That
Yeah,
was sort of a big deal for me.
yeah.
Uh, so I
Great album.
watched a lot of MTV, but like, I got a jean jacket and would walk down to a store called the Record Rack and buy like pins and put them on my jacket. I would
No.
not dare wear that to school. That was just more like my own personal, like, oh, like,
Okay.
yeah. So, I mean, I definitely had like love movies, love music. I wasn't really much of a reader, which I'm sort of ashamed to say. I read what was assigned to me in school, but I wasn't reading for pleasure at that
I was
point.
this honestly,
Um,
a lot of it.
yeah,
I was a lot the same way. I was a TV and movie kid.
yeah,
Didn't read as much till I got older. So stick with that for.
yeah,
So I got a couple
sure.
of questions. So we talked about it. So Paul and I were chatting a little bit offline before we got started. So Pyromania, obviously, you know, great album.
Hmm.
Um, because that was kind of like the first time it's sort of like it was sort of heavy metal, but it had a little bit of a poppy
Right.
feel to it. It was commercially accessible in a way, and they were kind of like in a way, sort of like a poppier version of Led Zeppelin. Um,
Yeah.
what other kind of music at that time were you into? Like, what was your thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of, I guess I really started with Def Leppard. Before that, it was like sort of whatever was on kind of thing. But I mean, Def Leppard sort of also like coincided with MTV. Like now we're watching videos and
Uh-huh.
just like the distorted guitar thing. I was like, that was when I was seventh grade, just starting to become a teenager. That really struck a chord with me. Like, I don't really listen to Def Leppard much anymore, though I still have like actually the record before High and Dry sometimes I put on. Um, but like just distorted guitar, that's something that's really stuck with me. Like if there's a thread between most of my favorite bands, I like things without guitar as well, but my favorite bands tend to be that. So no, like when I was in middle school, it was Def Leppard, the Scorpions,
Scorpions.
stuff
Huh.
like that.
Rock me like a
Um,
hurricane. Huh.
yeah, eventually the then in like a classic rock phase, like, especially people I think of my age in the 80s. But the thing that sort of like started moving me into a different direction musically and a hugely important record for me as a music listener was Living Color's Vivid.
Oh yeah.
Man, I think that was junior year of high school. I listened to that. I didn't buy a record at the time. I bought a cassette and totally wore it out. I had to buy a second one because it was unplayable
That
anymore.
that
So
was
for me, that was like the bridge to when I went to college, uh, discovering more sort of like punk indie music, which, but then I was sort of
cult
all
of
in and started over
personality.
again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So big Living Color fan. That was definitely a band that helped change sort of what I was listening to.
Yeah. So talk to me about, so you were watching a lot of TV. What were you watching?
Yeah. Oh, anything and everything. I mean, so it was just movies that, back then HBO would show the same movies over and over again.
Yes.
So some of the movies were ridiculous and stupid.
Yep.
Uh, it's funny. I remember, I think my siblings and I, we joke about how often we saw like old Chevy Chase movies, like It
Huh.
Seems Like Old Times, that was
Yep.
always on.
Foul play.
Yeah, Foul Play was always on regular TV. But I would see horror movies too. But I mean, I was a scaredy cat. Like I would watch some, but I would have nightmares from all of them. My brother, oddly enough, he was 5 years younger. He became like the hardcore horror kid, like
Oh,
watching stuff way gorier than I would watch, even though he was 5 years younger than me. Um, excuse me. But I watch a ton of sitcoms like MASH.
no. Of
Like, for as a teenager, like
course.
Hawkeye Pierce was like my weird role model for a really long time,
Yep.
as a teenager, just because I saw all the MASH episodes just over and over because they just kept replaying them. So yeah, just a lot of like 80s trash and not so trash
Uh-huh.
pop culture. I just sort of consumed it all. Along with sports, I was a big baseball fan, got baseball cards, and
Okay.
I never played D&D, but I did like the sports version of D&D. There was a
Yep.
game called Baseball Stratomatic.
Oh, I played it. Um,
Yeah,
so I'm a,
so like for
I'm a,
everybody else out there, you got
I'm a
like individual
total,
cards for the players.
I'm a
You roll
baseball,
dice, and depending on what the dice roll was, it was a
I'm a
hit or
base,
whatever.
I'm a baseball stat nerd. I was before,
Yeah,
even before rotisserie became a thing. So
yeah,
I'm assuming a Red Sox fan.
yes, yeah,
Well, so I mean, I'm a diehard Yankees fan. So we got a little,
yeah. I can hear it. Yeah.
we have some beef going on already. So
No, it's terribly sad that it just doesn't mean as much anymore.
no, it doesn't. It doesn't. But
Yeah.
one day it will again. So hold on. So talk to me though about your. I have chronic back problems, which I've been
Uh-huh.
dealing with forever. You had some back issues. What happened there?
Yeah. So I had scoliosis, so curvature of the spine, and it wasn't discovered until late. Uh, part of the issue, I think there was like a few years in early high school, late middle school, like where I just wasn't getting a physical,
Right.
which is stuff that would happen in the 80s,
Yes.
not now. Um,
Yep.
and at our high school, I don't know if you remember this, but at the high school, they would do a scoliosis check where you'd have to go through the embarrassment of
Take it up.
standing in line with your shirt off, and the
Oh,
nurse
yep.
would look at your spine, like ask you to touch your toes. So I remember for a year or two, the nurse would just give me a look and be like, "Oh, just switch shoulders with your book bag or something like that." So eventually, I think around the time when I was a sophomore, they're like, "Oh, he has some pretty serious curvage going."
Right.
I it was kind of all over the place. I had some, curvature in my lower back, middle, and the upper back. In the upper back, upper spine, it's the hardest. I assume this is probably still the case, but the hardest to correct without surgical intervention. Like the lower back was corrected with physical therapy, and I did wear a big giant torture device back brace.
No.
I'm forever thankful. I mean, because high school was miserable enough that my doctor was like, I'm not going to make you wear this to school. You just have to wear it when you come home and sleep at night.
Right.
It's just an incredibly uncomfortable thing. It was like
Right.
form-fitting hard plastic, and there was like a metal thing around.
I remember.
Um, Yeah. So like I've already made this way too long, but the shorter version is that wasn't helping my upper spine. At one point it was like a 45-degree curve. So, they said I had to have a spinal fusion because as you keep growing, which I still was, the curve will get worse and you would start growing sort of into yourself and like, you'd have no space for organs. So it's a bad thing.
That's
Yeah. So
I'm thinking that's slightly a problem.
yeah. So 5 days after graduating high school, I had the spinal fusion. Yeah. So they took bone from my hip and metal rods and attached it to my spine. So I was 6 foot when I went under and 6'3" after the surgery.
Is that right?
Um, yeah.
Well,
And, so that was, I mean, it was very painful. It was a long recovery. It's basically it was a week in the hospital.
right.
I mentioned I was 140 pounds when I graduated. After being in the hospital, I lost like 15.
Oh,
So I
geez.
came home 6'3", 125, just, a
Oh,
frightful sort of visage.
oh.
But, that summer I, was just spent recuperating, obviously eating. Uh, and it wasn't until a full year, like I wasn't supposed to do any sort of contact or
Right.
sports or stuff like that for a full year. But yeah, I mean, after the year, I don't know, I was 6'3". I was a little bit more mature. I felt a lot better about myself. I was playing a lot of basketball, just intramurals at school, and that instantly changed my basketball game.
So you literally
Becoming 6'3", 6'4".
physically grew into yourself, like really.
Yeah, 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 yeah. With medical aid for sure. So
Wow.
now I'm a little bit paying the price now. Because I did play basketball for, just recreationally, but for a long, long time. So because 2/3 of my vertebrae were fused,
Right.
one of the jobs of discs and of the disc is to be like shock absorbers. So I was doing all, for decades, I was playing basketball, but that was just it was taking a pounding on the sites outside of the surgery. So now I have stenoses outside, like in my neck and the lower back. Um, which just means like my feet are almost like always numb at this point. Not to the point where I'm going to fall, but it's like pins and needles sort of sensations. I
Okay.
used to get it more on my fingers. I'm glad I've sort of helped correct that with better like computer setup, like I have the computer at head height as opposed to. So anyway, yeah, there's still just back stuff happening.
Okay. All right. So once upon a time in my former life, I was actually a certified high school English teacher, but I got out before it really got started. You,
Yeah.
however, stuck with it. Talk to me about life in a classroom.
Oh, I'm not certified, but I am certified. Because I teach at a private school. So we don't have to, like a private school can do whatever the fuck they want. There's no certification. They
Right.
can hire whoever they want, obviously, because they hired me. Uh, yeah, I was horrified to realize that this is actually my 30th year at this school.
Wow.
Uh, I did take 1 year off, so I've been teaching. This will be my 29th year teaching, but the 30th year,
And what type?
since I started teaching. So the school I teach at, it's a 7th through 12th all boys school. And typically I've been teaching geometry, which is mostly freshmen, and then calculus, various levels of calculus, which is mostly seniors. But sometimes you get younger and older kids in both those classes.
So
And sorry, go ahead.
were you a math kid growing up? Like, I mean, that's how do you become a that was your thing back then? I mean, you
Yeah,
talk
yeah, yeah.
it's automatic, you got to do a lot of calculations in your head.
Yeah, for sure. No, I went to undergraduate. I was a math major.
Uh,
Because I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was like, oh, I was always good at math. I'll just stick with it. Uh, and I went to right after graduating Providence College, I went to UVM and I got my master's, a 2 years master's degree in math. And out of grad school, I sort of fumbled my way into the teaching job. Um, can I tell you how I got into grad school? Because it's
of
kind of
course.
crazy. I don't think I've
Yes.
ever really told this story, like in a
Please.
podcast or live. So
Let's hear it.
I had no idea what I wanted to do after college. And I sort of screwed up my major. I started off as math education, but they put me ahead in math by mistake. I was doing poorly. I panicked and ended up declaring humanities. And then I did better in math, so I ended up as math humanities, which meant I couldn't go teach in high school because I didn't have the math education. So I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? I applied to two grad schools. I applied to Boston University and the University of Vermont. Never heard back from BU. Like I call and be like, hey, I sent an application, like, oh, it's probably in the mail. Never heard from them. And the same thing happened with UVM. Although with UVM, I sort of felt like it was weird because I was sending it to different addresses. Never heard from them. Either school. So now it's the summer of 1993. no job, parents getting divorced. I have a new girlfriend, who's actually now my wife. It was just like a weird summer. And I get a phone call from the dean of the math department at UVM. He's like, hey, we're moving my office and we found your application under my desk. Would you like to be considered for admittance still?
Oh God.
I was like, okay, yeah, sure. He's like, all right, let me call you back tomorrow. So he calls me back. This is late July. He's like, okay, you're in. I'm like, that's great, but what's it going to cost? Like, I have a ton of student loans from, my undergrad. Like, I don't know what I can do financially. Parents getting divorced, blah, blah, blah. He's like, okay, we're having a meeting next week. I'll call you back. So now it's like early August.
Right.
He calls me back and said, all right, you're in, and we're going to offer you a teaching fellowship. I'm like, okay, what's that? He said, tuition is waived. You teach one class per semester, and we give you a stipend of $9,000 for the year. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll see you in 3 weeks. So that's how I got into grad school. Yeah.
Wow, you hear these kind of like, oh, we found your file under the desk, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they actually found it under the
That's
desk.
what he told me. Yeah. Yeah.
Jeez, wow, good for you. All right, that's it. Hear that? We broke an exclusive right here on the. All right, how you got into
Yeah.
teaching? All right, fair enough. All
Yeah.
right, so look, let's skip ahead. So talk to me. So you're a guy who you grew up, you didn't read much, you were a scaredy cat, and now you're a hardcore horror author. You're gonna have to walk me through that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I had like a love terrified relationship with horror,
Right,
uh, mainly movies. Um, it's right. The first time I tried reading Stephen King's It was the summer I had the back surgery.
right,
So I was like, oh, I'm gonna be stuck inside all summer. I'll try reading a book. And my
right,
parents had It on the shelf.
right.
I read the first chapter and I said,
I'm
hell
out.
no.
I'm out.
uh,
I'm
it's
out.
the basement of my house was very scary. So it's like, there's no way. And we kept a lot of like food in the basement, like
Right,
extra boxes here. It's like, I'm not going to the basement while reading it. It's just not going to happen.
right.
Anyway, so I also mentioned like I sort of fell into a double major as an undergrad as math and humanities. So for humanities, the one of the last classes I took was a Lit 101, basically. I was a senior, second semester senior, in with like a bunch of freshmen
Right.
in an English class. But it was so much fun. Like it blew me away. The professor was amazing. He was a punk fan who loved the band The Dead Boys. So, we really connected. He let me write like essays comparing the stuff that we read to like punk songs and stuff like that. But I'll never forget in that class, I read Joyce Carol Oates' Where Have You Going? Where Have You Been? And I put it down and I remember the feeling. I remember thinking to myself, I didn't know people wrote things like this. So, I mean, that really opened my eyes. And shortly after that, when I graduated, Lisa bought me for my birthday, because my birthday's in June, Stephen King's The Stand.
Oh,
And when I went away to UVM for 2 years, Lisa and I were doing a long distance relationship thing. It's just your social life in grad school is just not the same as it is in undergrad.
right.
So I had a lot of free time to myself. So I just fell in love with reading. I read all of the King, and through Dance Macabre, I found Shirley Jackson and Peter Straub and Clive Barker. And so while I was struggling by the skin of my teeth to get a math degree, I also had like this crash course in like horror fiction reading. And I branched out too and like fell in love with like Kurt Vonnegut and other books
Right.
too. But yeah, um, that
Okay.
was how it started. Then I just had this weird itch. I was like, oh, I had this story that was nagging at me. He's like, yeah, you should try writing a story. Because at the same time, I was trying to teach myself how to play guitar. So I definitely had a want for some sort of creative outlet, but
Mm.
writing won out in the end.
So really, we can trace it back to your connection in punk music turned out to be the gateway into horror for you, in a way.
Oh, for horror reading, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was definitely watching the movies in the 80s, like, but yeah, in terms of reading fiction, yeah, I think so.
All right. See, who said punk rock had no purpose?
I don't know. Not me.
Awesome. Okay. So you start to get a flavor for it. You're kind of getting into, horror fiction. So now you're writing it. What is it about the genre of horror? And I ask this on a regular basis because I'm really kind of fascinated about because there's subgenres within horror, but what is it about horror in general that appeals to you, both as a reader and a writer? And when you're writing horror, is there something that you're trying to kind of fundamentally explore, or are you just like, I'm just making up goofy shit and this is what comes out?
Um, I mean, in some ways they can be two different things, but like as a reader, as a fan, for movies too, uh, I'm definitely attracted to the idea that these movies sort of like feel honest in a way that is unique to me, or is a unique way to feel like, we're describing the world in a metaphorical way, but it just rings as like being honest. Similar to me, it's the same idea with like punk music too. Um, that there's sort of like an integrity of vision to both when it works. I mean, not every punk
Right.
song works, and clearly not every horror works. There's a lot of horror that I don't like or I think fails
Well, hold on for a second.
as art. Yeah,
I want to explore that theme for a second. So, I mean, I like it though that you're saying that, where the horror works, and we're going to sort of couch it in that with that subtext that has an honesty that maybe other genres don't connect with in the same way. What do you
yeah.
what's that honesty? What is it that you feel that you're getting out of, again, the horror that works? What are you
Yeah.
getting out of it that you're not finding elsewhere?
Well, I don't know if I'm not finding it elsewhere. Maybe a better way of saying it would be, and hopefully this isn't too boring for some people because I feel like I say this a lot, but what I'm going to say a lot. So every piece of art could be music, stories, paintings, it's trying to communicate something, right? Trying to reveal some sort of truth.
Mhm.
And it could be like a very personal truth, could be like societal, could be, universal, truth. So in a horror story, it's a typically pretty terrible truth, right? Um, I don't know. To me, that's just honest. Like, I mean, just the idea that, we go through our day-to-day lives assuming, things are going to be there, assuming there's like sort of this some, there's some safety net there in all sorts of different ways, both financial, personal, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. Or just the idea that you're going to assume that you're going to drive home and make it, where something, anything could happen. I don't know. In horror, like in a way, it's just the reminder that no, you're not safe. Like anything could happen at any moment. Um, and I weirdly take comfort from that other people recognize that it's okay to feel that way. Like to me, that's my main connect. It's always been my main
I,
connection with anything is like, oh, the person who created this, I'm feeling this way. That means they feel this way too. Oh, I'm not alone. Like it to me, that's really what it boils down to. And that's not unique to horror. It can be
I
any
know,
sort of form
I
of
get
art.
it. But if you're
But
telling stories
yeah,
that kind of are revealing or reflecting some of the worst things that can and do happen, or your greatest fears, it's kind of this reminder that, life is fragile and that, we may want our life to sort of essentially be status quo. We want predictability, we want reliability, but like that, anything can happen at any moment and any time for any reason, and there's nothing you could do about it.
yeah, I mean for sure. Yeah, so like for me, the horror stuff that doesn't really land with me as much or doesn't work with me as much are sort of horror stories that have like a reactionary structure. And I don't even talk about like the individual politics mentioned in the story, but for horror stories that were like, oh, this terrible thing happens or this terrible monster shows up, and then the monster's defeated, everyone's happy. There's there's been no change. Like the status quo has been
Right.
yeah, returned, right. Um and that and no, like I have no interest in those stories because those just ring so false to me. It's like it's not to say you can't have like a happy ending,
Right.
but like just the fact that everybody went through this thing that they went through in the story, they would be fundamentally changed
Change
by
forever.
what
That's
happened.
that's
And
exactly right.
I want my horror stories to reflect that. Now listen, Evil Dead 2 is one of my favorite movies ever.
Right.
Um, sort of like, what's happening with the horror to me is uh I still think to me there's the excitement, the kinetic energy of what's going on there, like,
Right.
just the madness of what's happening in the story. Um, that still in my mind that still fits sort of what I've been describing, even though it's like,
No,
it's a
I
sort of a goofy horror comedy on one hand, but at the same time, I don't know, there's still scenes in that movie that like come really close to like the feeling of losing it. Like, the scene where Ash is uh he notices like the turtle lamp is like bending and laughing and everything in the room starts laughing. He starts laughing and it goes on for an uncomfortably long time.
Right.
And the type of shots that Raimi does, it starts to really actually freak me out, even though I've seen the movie so many times.
Right. Because you feel like they're
Bits
right
like
on the
that.
edge of like they're just on the verge of losing their minds, like for real.
Yeah, and the whole movie
Right
is like
there.
everything's on the verge of like losing control, which is just sort of another aspect of, I guess, a terrible truth.
Right. Okay, fair enough. All right. So look. So let's talk about the big one here. So let's talk about getting your book, The Cabin at the End of the World.
Uh-huh.
Great book, and
Thank you.
you get it made into a movie directed by M. Night Shyamalan. So was this one of those deals where they said, hey, no, come on, be part of the team. Let's hear your input. Or was it one of those, we wrote you your check, go away. It's not yours anymore.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the second one. Which also is totally understandable. Like at the
Right.
time, the book was optioned in 2018. So when I don't know if you've had anything optioned, you probably have, but like when you go through when I've been through the option, it's the option, but also everything is negotiated. So if they decide to buy the rights, you don't have to go through all that dickering again, right? It's already been done.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 2018, I had no contractual saying anything. In the early going with the early producers who did option, they wanted my opinion, but they were not beholden to it.
Right.
So I gave them some opinions on some of the early drafts of the screenplay. Um, to their credit, they listened to me, but I don't think they listened to a word I said. Um,
Okay. Right.
and it took like a few years before, like there were a couple of directors who were briefly attached, but didn't quite work out with them. And then I started hearing like the summer of 2019 that, oh yeah, M. Night is sort of interested. He read the screenplay. I'm like, okay, whatever. Uh, you always hear like big names and that never sort of happens. And then obviously like 2020 happened, but they were still like, oh yeah, he still might be interested. And they kept, renewing the option. And then it became, oh no, he actually wants to make this, but he has to finish his movie Old first. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. That seems hopeful.
Right.
Uh, but still had to wait a while. But once the summer of 21 Old came out, things started happening quickly. Um, he wrote the screenplay. I had a phone call with him in November of 21. It was the first time I talked to him on the phone. It was a nice phone call. He was very complimentary about the book, told me what he was changing, which I really appreciated,
Right.
and all that stuff. So yeah, in the early going, he would ask me a couple of questions, but once they started filming, there was no, yeah, there was no input. I didn't even actually see the screenplay until after they were done filming.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
So you didn't get a chance. They didn't say like, "Hey, come on and check out the set and
I
see
did.
what."
I did a set visit. I was there for a couple of days, which
Oh, you
was,
were.
that was a really cool experience for sure. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Okay. So clearly, there were some changes, obviously, from the book to the movie. The ending, obviously, being kind of a big one. Now,
Yeah.
I get it. Even for the kind of story that it was, they kind of gave it a little bit of a, let's call it a feel-good ending, as much as you could, given
I
what was.
guess.
I know. I mean, I'm saying,
Yeah,
loosely,
yeah.
given the scenario. So I thought that personally that the book's ending was far more powerful because
Thank you.
you had a
Yeah.
real tragic horror, like, the thing that you feared the most did happen.
Uh-huh.
And then when you're done, you're sort of like, well, who knows what's going to happen after? And that's and
Yeah.
that's kind of the real dread. Like you're saying, hey, when bad things happen, it's not like a bad thing happens and then we go, oh, phew, thank God that's over. And then you just go back to your life. I mean,
Yeah.
let's face it, it's gonna fuck you up. Now, what did you think about how they handled the end? I mean, I kind of understand to
Yeah.
some degree, but I don't know. This is just my
Yeah.
own opinion.
Sure.
I
Yeah, yeah.
thought I thought the ending was anticlimactic because
Yeah.
I thought it undercut the tension and the integrity of kind of like what you were pushing up against.
I like the movie. I really don't like the ending.
Yeah.
But it's kind of fun to talk about the differences. Um, I think, the movie certainly reflects M. Night's sort of Catholic beliefs, whereas my book reflects my beliefs. Um, and you were talking about, the ending, and I understand what you're saying, and I think that's how they were thinking of it. But to me, I find the end of the movie way more disturbing and way less hopeful than the ending of my book. I think Cabin at the End of the World, despite some horrible things happening. I think my ending is a hopeful ending. I think that, sorry for spoilers, but I think that my characters making the choice that they make, choosing to reject fear, choosing to reject, this awful, cruel sort of awful, cruel, just choice that
Okay.
they were supposed to.
Right.
To me, that's a hopeful act. They're like, no, fuck
Okay.
this. We think this is wrong. We refuse. So the movie's version of the ending, the characters who are left alive, I won't say who are left
Right.
alive. There's no ambiguity.
No, none.
There's clearly some, God or ruler of the universe who's doing all this stuff.
Right.
Uh, so not only these two characters have to live with, oh, we let one of our loved ones die to save the rest of the world. They have to live with that knowledge and live with the knowledge that this is incredibly cruel,
So I,
God,
so
like that
I mean, in
killed
fact,
thousands of people for what
thousands,
purpose?
probably millions.
Yeah, right. So to me, I find that way more disturbing. That's actually voicing like a fear that I have that,
Right.
yeah, there's a God and it's a
I
terribly
get
cruel,
that
insane God.
yeah, it's interesting that you're saying it that way. So I guess when I say that it felt again, very loosely that, it was a little bit of a
Oh
happy
no,
end.
they think it's a happy ending. No,
Right.
I think most people, especially in the United States, think that's a happy ending.
Right,
But
because the quote unquote heroes, let's just call it,
yeah,
they chose to do a terrible thing for the greater good so that everyone can then go about their lives, and then the assumption would be that we'll clean up this mess and then we'll go back to our lives, and life will go on, and
right.
things will be okay. But you're right. I mean, I agree with you in your sense that, if in fact God or whatever
Mhm.
spiritual entity is controlling things said, you know what? I've decided for whatever my infinite wisdom, I'm going to fuck your shit up. And the only way I'm going to let you off the hook is if you do something horrible.
Right.
Okay. That's a bit harsh.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, it goes back to what I was saying before about like the sort of a reactionary ending, like the idea, like, oh, and this isn't unique to horror. Uh, it's, I mean, so let me say this. Every culture has stories of sacrifice where
Right.
characters make a sacrifice.
Right.
And it seems to me like a very sort of American Christianized, there's a type of ending where it's like what happens in the Cabinet at the End of the World, where a character chooses to often, chooses to be, willingly chooses to be the sacrifice, whether it's like actively like you're getting killed
Yep.
or they stay behind to stop the monsters.
Right.
So everyone else can go on and everyone else just continues living without a thought like, oh, that was so great that we're sad for a second that this person died for us, but now we get to live the rest of our
Yeah.
lives. And
Yeah.
I just find that like, I find that to be a horror. Like, no, we should not be celebrating this. I
Right.
mean, I think the horror of existence is that on some level, we probably do have to grind some people in the gears of society. But
Right. Yes.
should we celebrate it? Like, I don't think it
Right.
should be celebrated. I think it
And
should
you're
be
right.
questioned. It should be, yeah.
There's this, it's that sense of sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's you are, it's a celebration of martyrdom, right? Like I saw this on
Yeah.
someone face posted this meme on Facebook very recently, and I commented on it. Someone said like, I love my kids so much, I would die for you. I'm like,
Hmm.
but you know, but shouldn't you? But the real work is when you live for them, right? Like, and
Hmm.
that's the thing. Like, it's one
Yeah.
big thing to
That's
say,
another part too.
I'll do this. I'll sacrifice myself or whatever, and go out in a blaze of glory to show you how much I care and how much I love you and how important everyone is. But you know what's really hard? Getting up every single day and dealing with this shit
Yeah.
out. That's hard. Like
Sure. I mean,
that's the
yeah.
real
I mean,
work.
sacrifice is a noble thing.
Right.
I'm more fixated on the other end of like
Yes.
the
Right.
people who are the benefit of the sacrifice. Like,
Yes.
are
Yes.
you going to sort of like reevaluate like life
Yes.
choices? Are you going to reevaluate what happens after this, or are you just going to continue to do,
Same old, same old.
blah blah blah? Anyway, I don't know.
All right, okay, well, that was great, but now it's a special time, special
Yeah.
segment on the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel
Oh
are some
boy.
possible categories, including a few new ones I brought out just for tonight's show. Wherever it lands is what you get, and the categories are Dinner is Served, The Reanimator, Soundtrack of Your Life, Apocalypse, Stranger to Strangeland, I Am Rocket Man, and Cabin Fever. All right, you ready? Here
Oh
we go.
boy. Okay.
All right, round and round. Who knows?
You'll have to read it to me because I can't see it.
Okay, you got the Reanimator. All right.
Ah,
This one
Herbert
seems to come
West's
up a lot.
Reanimator.
All right, so you have died a gruesome death, but
Oh man.
medical student Herbert West has offered to reanimate you with his scary serum. If taken, you have a 50-50 chance of returning to life completely normal or as a zombie-like creature. If, however, you choose to forego the serum, you have a 50-50 chance of going straight to hell. Do you want to be reanimated?
Uh, that's a lot to unpack.
Yes, it is.
Uh, yeah, I wouldn't choose. I mean, because I don't know if I,
You
well, one, I
have
don't know if
no,
I
no,
believe in
no,
hell.
nope, nope, nope. You can't pass.
But
You gotta choose. You gotta choose.
well, I just said I would choose not to have the juice.
Okay, all right, that's it.
Yeah,
Okay, so you're risking the 50-50 of going to hell.
I guess so. Yeah.
All right, okay, all right. You're gambling with the devil.
I
All right,
guess I just made a noble sacrifice
there
for
you go.
humanity.
There you go.
I hope they appreciate it.
All right, so do I. All right, so just a heads up, just a reminder for those who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for Paul, put them in the chat box, and we'll get to a few at the end. Okay, so we are now going to pick your poison. I got three choices for you: A, B, and C, but I'm not going to tell you what's behind each one. You got to
Okay.
pick. So pick A, B, or C.
I guess I'll be like a high school student and when in doubt, choose C.
C. All right, I like this one. This one comes up a lot. This one is Benjamin's Button. Again, I'm going to give you two choices. All right.
Okay.
Much like Benjamin Button, you can live your life fully in reverse, where you are born incredibly old and then you get younger until you reach your cellular state. Or you can relive the life that you have now, only, knowing that any changes that you make, because changes will be inevitable, that you make in your past, knowing how your life has actually unfolded, it's going
Uh-huh.
to change that new old life in any number of unpredictable ways that will likely result in a new life going forward that doesn't look exactly like the one that you have now. So, which is it going to be? Life in reverse or life do-over?
Wow. Man, you're writing like horror stories with these.
Mm-hmm.
I, my horror writer head is like all sorts of places. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I think being old and then going backwards would be really weird. Uh, but it'd be really sad because I assume I'm going to have the memories of my first life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Uh, but wait a minute. So the old life, when I go backwards, I still know the people I know and whatnot, right?
Yep, you're gonna go from real old to real little by little. You're gonna get, and you're gonna probably make different choices because you're gonna go in the opposite direction, and who knows how that's gonna go.
Well, if I live my life and that I'm old and I just go backwards, that's what you're saying, right?
So you're gonna start off as an old man.
Oh, so like I don't know, like I start off as an old man and know,
Start,
I don't
start,
know.
starting fresh.
I guess I'll start with the old. I'll start as the old guy, I guess.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So look, you're gonna end up in diapers either way. So there you go.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. Now I'm gonna give you some truth serum. All right. I got 10 questions for you. You ready?
Okay.
All right. Favorite flavor ice cream.
Chocolate chip. Really boring, but yeah.
What's one food you will never eat ever for
Pickles.
pickles?
Yeah.
Okay. Bucket list destination anywhere in the world.
Oh, shoot. I should it needs to be a quick one. Oh, I don't know. Man. I guess I'll say France, Paris, Tremblay. I probably should see, some places that have Tremblay on, names on it, things. Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. All right. Scariest movie you ever saw?
Are we going by like what I still think is scary or what's given me the most nightmares?
Whatever.
You
Scariest
know,
to you that you
I'll
ever
do
saw.
like a combo. Like the first Nightmare on Elm Street fucked
Oh,
me up.
yep.
Uh, had a lot of Freddy nightmares. I had more shark nightmares because of Jaws, but I can
Oh,
watch Jaws now. Nightmare on Elm Street still a scary movie. Yeah.
okay. Fair enough. All right. It's a classic. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
One superpower. Um, super strength.
Huh? Do you play any musical instruments? And if not, which one if you could?
I play guitar.
Okay.
I'm a hack, but I've been a long time hack.
Yeah. Acoustic, electric, or both?
Both. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Favorite cocktail? And if you don't drink, your favorite unwind beverage?
Beer. I like all sorts of types, but I like a good beer. It's usually my first choice if I'm given a choice of alcoholic beverage.
All right. You can see a live performance, sports, music, theater, whatever, any seat, any venue, any time in history. What's your choice?
Oh, um, that's tough. I'm sure there are a lot of great sports stuff that to see some great sporting events. But I would love to have like, be in the front of a Husker Du concert because I never got to see Husker Du live, and they're my favorite band. So,
Okay, fair enough. Okay, what if you could pick a venue, what would it be?
oh, so it'd be the living room, which no longer exists. It's a club in Providence, or it
Oh,
used to be a club in Providence.
fair enough. All right, if you could get a continuation of any canceled TV show ever, what would it be?
I'll go with a semi-recent one, Hannibal, even though it's probably perfect the way it ended, but I would go for one more season.
Okay, so that's let me ask you about that just real quick because I started to watch it when it came out.
Yeah,
I didn't. I mean, I love Silence of the Lambs.
yeah,
I've read a bunch of the books. They're right over there. I didn't completely get into it, and I wasn't sure if I should keep going. So,
yeah.
like,
How far did you make it? Do you remember?
not far. I admit, probably only a couple of episodes in the
So I
first.
think yeah, it took me like 2 or 3 episodes. Because honestly, my first try watching it, I said, no, this is not Will Graham because I love the
Right,
movie Manhunter so much,
right.
with William Peterson as Will Graham. But there's is it episode 2 or 3? It's fairly early on, and they do a visual thing where Mads Mikkelsen is interviewing somebody, and
Right.
how they frame him, it looks like a blurred out face of a lion. I was like, oh, I'm going to watch this till the end. So now,
Okay,
actually, I think Mads is my favorite Hannibal.
okay, okay. Fair
Yeah,
enough. All right.
yeah, yeah. Season 1, season 2 is amazing. 3
Okay.
is bonkers. Yeah, season 2 is like,
All
okay,
right.
this is amazing. Yeah,
All right. I'll give it another shot. Okay. So there's a couple of questions. I don't see any questions from the audience. There's one or two I wanted to ask that I didn't have a chance to earlier.
sure.
I wanted to talk to you. So once upon a time, you collaborated with Stephen Graham Jones. What was that like?
Oh, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, so we wrote a young adult book called The Floating Boy and the Girl Who Couldn't Fly. And it was published under the name P.T. Jones, a very clever, portmanteau of our names. And it was published with Cheesine Publications, which is, no longer in existence. And so the book's out of print. We might bring it back someday. We'll see. But I mean, the writing itself was a lot of fun. Uh, so this was like 2010-ish. Um, yeah, I think we were both like he had published way more than I had, but um, I feel like we were both still sort of like, climbing whatever ladders we thought we were climbing. Um, and I thought our voices were close enough that back then that, they could meld together well.
Right.
No, really, the only hard part for me was my plan was to Steve. I was like, hey, uh, we'll do this co-written thing while I'm working on my chapter. You can be, working on your own stuff, and then when I pass it to you,
Right.
when you're working, I'll work on my stuff. So the problem was I would spend like a week or two on my part, send it to Steven, and he would send his part back the next day. So it didn't quite work out because he's so damn prolific, and he's just compelled to write. Like the only person I know who is literally compelled to write. I've been sitting next to him on a panel while a panel discussion is going on, and he's writing a story on a napkin. And I'm not exaggerating.
I,
Um, yeah, so it was a lot of fun. Um, Getting it published wasn't so fun, but the writing
why?
with Stephen was
Why?
fun.
What happened?
Well, I mean, some of it was like the, a a sort of like a consultant editor was brought in. I thought, their comments were really like weird, um, including saying stuff like, "Oh, well, teachers and librarians won't go for this." I'm like, well, we didn't write the book for teachers and librarians. We're writing it for, teens, which is something sort of like a Tyro would say too, like we knew nothing about we knew
Right.
nothing about young adult fiction, but um yeah, that was all. Like, we
Okay.
tried to sell it to big publishers, didn't quite work out.
Right, right.
Uh
Okay.
I do have I wrote a middle grade novel that's coming out next summer, which I'm really excited about.
Oh,
And
cool.
that was kind of fun.
Right on.
And my experience with the middle grade editor this time was amazing. She really helped me out.
Good, good. Okay. All right, guys. So I'm going to share my screen. I got some goodies to share, so bear with me, and then we're
All
going to
right.
say. So, all right, buddy. So talk to me. What am I looking at here?
All right, so this is horror movie and novel with the incredibly cleverly titled horror movie and novel, which yeah, very proud to say it made the New York Times bestsellers list this summer, which was amazing. Um, so this book sort of plays with the cursed film trope, and the conceit or the setup is that in 1993 there was a group of four to five, maybe another one or two uh, young adults in their like early to mid 20s, and uh, they were making sort of an art house, disturbing, pretentious horror movie, my favorite kind, and they were making it in and around in Rhode Island, and something happens at the end of filming that prevents it from ever being screened. You know, a tragedy that happens on set. Excuse me. So fast forward to sort of present day, the novel opens with uh, a man narrating basically an audiobook of his experience. And this man never names himself. He refers to himself only as the Thin Kid, which is the character that he played in horror movie, the movie, not the
Right,
book.
right.
um, yeah, so the book sort of bounces back and forth between his experiences on set back in 1993, his experiences now trying to get the movie remade, and as hopefully the book builds to like an exciting, hopefully, reveal of secrets of what happened on set, and what might continue to be happening off set. Um, and the other sort of fun part was that I included the entire screenplay of the original movie as a part of the book. So the book is split up between the Thin Kid's narration and actual, chunks of the screenplay.
Very cool.
Um, yeah, I'm very bad at the elevator pitch, so you got the long pitch.
All right, fair enough. All right, well, it's great, everyone. I'm sure if you haven't already read it, grab yourself a copy because I know I am absolutely going to. All right, as for me, I am thrilled to showcase my latest book is Trigger Point. It's the next book in my ongoing series featuring hard-boiled private detective Angela Hardwick, who in my mind is part Blade Runner, part Doctor Who, part John Wick. So in Trigger Point, Hardwick has recently been released from prison for reasons I will not explain right now. And as her first solo case back on the street, she's hired by a really nasty pimp to track down whoever killed his best earner. And for him, this isn't about business, it's personal. She's reluctant to take the case, but she's got some history with the guy, again, for reasons I will not explain, and she needs the gig. And along the way, her protege and partner, Eric Whistler, suddenly goes missing, caught in some sort of temporal loop. So she's torn between tracking down the killer of sex workers and her missing partner. Meanwhile, the fabric of space-time is literally beginning to crack with these fracture points, and it drags Hardwick into this realm of nightmares, of symbolism, and the dreamscape, and it forces her to confront these demons that she had really hoped would stay buried forever. It's probably one of the most dangerous cases she's ever had to face, which is really saying something, and it pushes her to the brink. So Trigger Point, just so you know, there's 5 books in the series. They all are standalone novels. You can read them in any order. It doesn't matter. And they're all a mix of suspense and action and some physical and psychological horror. And I think you guys will really dig it. So you can jump in anytime that you want, in any book that you want. Okay. Paul, that's our show. I want to thank my guest, Paul Tremblay, for coming in and talking to us about his life and horror and being a scaredy cat and writing and doing all sorts of great things. And I want to thank everyone who's watching at home. Uh, Please come back for more. And as always, be gentle, be kind, be generous of spirit, and for God's sakes, go read a book. And I'll see you all next week. All right. Take care, everyone. And I'll see
Thanks,
you.
Russ.
All right. Bye now. Thanks, guys. And I'll catch you next time. Okay.